Right now, lawmakers investigating the Jeffrey Epstein case have one of their most challenging witnesses to date, his former personal assistant. Sarah Kellen was named both as a possible co-conspirator in Epstein's crimes and, she says, a victim of his abuse. This is how the chair of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, spoke about her appearance today.
This is going to be a tough interview. Of all the interviews we've done, this is going to be the toughest one. It's going to be hard because, there's some that believe she was, 100% a victim or survivor, and then there's some that think she was a victim and victimizer.
Joining me now is MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin. Eric Fadali is partner and managing attorney at the Bloom firm, which represents multiple Jeffrey Epstein survivors. Lisa, you actually interviewed Sarah Kellen. What more can you tell us about her story and what she might share with the committee?
Well, Chris, I talked to Sarah Kellen over a series of several months, and she had never really before spoken out publicly. She is insistent, as you just said, that she is a victim of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse that occurred weekly, sometimes violently. And she detailed for the committee what that was like in vivid and frankly brutal terms this morning. She's told the committee she's not going to discuss other survivors. She says they should be free to talk about their own experiences when and if they choose, but they should not be compelled to come before the committee. She tells them today that she hopes she is the first and the last person that has to come before the committee as a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein's in this way. But one of the things we did discuss is that label that's been slapped on her potential co-conspirator. She says she had no knowledge or involvement in the prosecution, the non-prosecution agreement, rather, constructed in 2007 by Epstein's lawyers on one hand and Florida federal prosecutors on the other, through which she was given that label. She says she doesn't even knew about it until roughly 2 years later. And that's important because that's largely been the frame through which we have seen Sarah Kellen for almost 20 years. She says Epstein's team did that to protect him and make sure that she would never talk to any law enforcement. And in particular, she told me it literally put a muzzle on us. It made us a target and made it impossible for us to speak. Sarah Kellen only feeling free to talk now about her own experiences, given that Jeffrey Epstein is dead.
So, Eric, Kellen is a complicated person for the committee to question. Again, as someone who works with victims of sexual abuse, how do you think lawmakers should be approaching this questioning?
I think complicated is the correct word. This is a very complicated situation. Certainly, she claims that she was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein, and I have no reason not to believe that. But it is a complicated situation because there are allegations that she also facilitated the alleged abuse of many other victims. So, I am conflicted in how to approach this. Certainly complicated is the right word, but, it's important. I can't speak specifically about her circumstance or what led to her decisions. She was an adult apparently at the time, but generally I can say that Jeffrey Epstein was a master manipulator. And it's really important to remember that he manipulated many women and many individuals to do a lot of things that maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise. And that's just generally true for Jeffrey Epstein. Again, I can't speak to the specifics or how or why, she decided to do what she did, but I can say generally that Jeffrey Epstein was a master manipulator and he abused a lot of young women and girls.
Well, to the extent that you can then, Eric, and from your conversation with clients, do they know Kellen? How do they feel about her and the role she may or may not have played?
Yeah, I can't speak to the individuals and whether they knew or did not know Kellen, but I can say, as a part for the role that she played, again, I hate to keep repeating this word, it is really complicated because on one side, certainly we understand the power and the manipulation and the intimidation that Jeffrey Epstein had on all of his victims, all of the survivors, of his abuse. But on the other hand, we also know that he used a lot of people to help him facilitate that abuse. So we're really looking at both sides of the coin here. I will say she is probably someone who has a lot of information. I certainly believe she is someone who should be asked a lot of questions because I think she is someone who could shed a lot of light on Jeffrey Epstein, how he manipulated, how he used his power to abuse, and perhaps more importantly, who his co-conspirators actually were, who helped facilitate abuse, who were some of the men who are constantly with Epstein on the island at his house, and perhaps with a lot of these young women who he abused.
It's one of the things that when we've talked to the survivors, they've said, they would eventually like, obviously, for people to be held accountable. You believe that she knows she can name names.
I would think so. I mean, as someone who had such a prominent alleged role in Epstein's circle, I've heard her referred to as a lieutenant secretary, someone who was in charge of his date book. So certainly I would believe and assume, just based on the limited knowledge I have of her role, what's been reported, that she would likely be a person who has a lot of information about who was in Epstein's circle, who he was traveling with, who was, in the house, on the island, and also the timing of that. Because remember, it's important to remember who continued to associate with Jeffrey Epstein after 2008. So it's important to, if she has any information about who continued to, associate themselves with a known now sexual predator, a child convicted, trafficker, what it was at the time. So a registered sex offender. So I certainly believe she has some relevant information.